Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition, another episode of the Nexus podcast. I'm your co-host M2 Dave, and I'm here with my co-host King Burrito Franco. Call him whatever you want. Thank you for hosting, man.
Yep, always a pleasure to host, and like I said, I'm really glad to get this series going and seeing what other guests we can get on here.
Now, an individual I believe who doesn't need a long introduction, um, has played MK for 30 plus years. Mr. Sub Zero himself, um, longtime advocate for for MK for the community. Please welcome MK Tom Brady to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, guys.
So let's waste no time. I know you recently, I think a couple of days ago, you watched the combat cast. Let me just get your opinion on what you saw.
So, my opinion, just in the vacuum, is for just in general, not even in a vacuum. This patch is, and I think you've said this when we spoke privately, probably the best patch they've ever done in any Mortal Kombat game. I'm what they showed. I'm very anxious to see how much more there is in the patch notes. We know that they have changed Striker. They gave him another move. Sub Zero has another move. They did some buffs to Reiko. I believe his dash cancel. Um, they they good buffs to Shao Kahn. I love the Tarkart and Rage thing that they've doing with Baraka and then Melina as well. And they've also when they touched Kenshi, it wasn't like okay, a lot of times when they would balance a character, quote unquote balance, they'll just take everything from you and give you nothing in return. Like now you can't do anything that you used to do. Oh, and by the way, you don't have anything new you can do. And it kind of, we've all seen NRS do this in the past. They have, shown that they do not know how to properly balance a character. They either mega buff you or they take it all away or they give you a pointless buff or a pointless nerf just to say they did one or the other. So I was very, very impressed in this. I truly feel that, I mean, look, some people are just not going to like the cameo system. That's subjective. And I think it's not a Mortal Kombat thing. I think history has shown that games that traditionally don't have any form of tag at all, be it an assist or a true tag mode, they don't normally do well when the game goes to tag. Even Tekken, even though they had Tekken Tag 1, it had been well over a decade since Tekken Tag 1. And then when they went to Tekken Tag 2, 12, 13 years later, the newer Tekken community didn't really have any ties to that game. And they just didn't like the tag feature. It didn't go over well. So it's not Mortal Kombat. It's traditionally any game that really doesn't have an assist or tag function and they throw one in, people tend to not like it. And it's not because the game is good or bad, that's just a preference. So I think people are always going to have that. But I think besides that, had the game been released like this, I really think that the community would have started off with a bang. I mean, and I think the numbers would be much higher. I think the community would be very positive on things. And then, of course, they could focus more on some of the things that people were looking for, just maybe lobbies, things like that. I think this should have been the day one version of the game. I don't think any of what transpired over the last year and a half is even close. And I think had the game started like this, when we get to the first expansion, where the game would have been, I think Chaos Reigns would have sold so well that I don't think there'd even be a rumor that WB could be pulling funding. Like, this truly is, you really are seeing the direction that they're going with the game. Though so many questions that we had, because when the game came out, there was the things that the functionality wrong, the bugs wrong, the online, the lack of game modes and features. But even then you look at the characters and you say, even with the gameplay, what are they doing with this? Like, why is this move like this? Where are they going with that? Why is this assist like that? Why isn't this better? So many questions that didn't get answered for a very long time. Even when Chaos Reigns came out, it was like, really, is this really the complete version of what the game was supposed to be? And it was just tough for people to really see what direction they were going to go. And obviously, they're not going to communicate with that with us. So now that this patch comes out, we really see like this is the direction the game is trending. And when you see that vision, it answers a lot of those questions. And I think it The game is, it's always uttered, is this going to save the game? Is the game in the best place possible? Being in the best place it's ever been doesn't really matter when the game started out so bad. The game is in the best place now because the game, I believe, is actually good and has a lot of things for a lot of people. I know, like, there are some people, like I said, that are never going to get over the cameo system and never it's something to be said about why things are the way they are. But just the game right now in a vacuum, if I just look at it on its own merit, I would say finally it has gone that direction. I'm still not a fan of the cameo system, as I'm sure most aren't. Again, that's subjective. But just on the gameplay and the way they're making the characters play now, I think that is a world of improvement.
Well, that kind of begs the question, and I'm going to quote, not necessarily quote, I'm going to paraphrase, 'cause I don't want to read the whole thing, but I know a lot of probably your subscribers or people in general, maybe they think this way about you is, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I think it's Grass Hate or Grass Shade. He's kind of saying, I'm a long-term supporter, Tom. I want to watch you stream or whatever. So that kind of begs the question, why aren't you playing this game if you think it's so improved?
I'm not playing this game because some of my bitterness to the game is just that, just bitterness. I really was kind of hoping this game would be kind of a last hurrah for me. So I carved out, as busy as my life is with everything I'm doing, the first year I said I'm going to make sure I have time to stream and play and practice, etc. And for the first year, I was just getting frustrated. Frustrated not with the game, but as a Sub-Zero player, because it's frustrating in general to have any intelligent conversation with anyone in the community, because it's a lot of times talking to a bunch of kindergartners. The community has these trigger words they throw out, like washed, broke, carried, downplay. If you took these words out of the English language, I feel like most of them couldn't put a sentence together when talking about the game. So when I first got the game, and I was a little. Dave, you and I have an inside joke that the first thing that's always nerfed in every MK game is the ice clone. And when the game came out, and I was like, I don't believe it. Here we go again. And I was just looking for other things, like his slide. Why is it like this? I see they made it worse. In my mind, I'm like, they had to have made it worse so that they could make it better another way. Maybe an assist will complement it or whatever. It didn't. Ice ball slow. Damage scaling was horrendous. The 3 clones was 2 bars and did nothing. So I was just very confused. Everything he did was massively unsafe. And there were several characters that were kind of in this camp where we're like, why are they like this? What are they supposed to do? What's going on? In the community, you want to have these discussions early on in the game. You see there's clearly a problem. The community is like, oh, everything's good. Every character's broke. Everyone's downplayed. It's really hard. So I was frustrated because with each update, it just seemed like they were doing what I call knee-jerk patches. Peacemaker is whatever, let's nerf him to the ground. They didn't look to improve the game and the meta as much as they were just like, okay, we'll just release a new cameo, nerf the other ones, and then every character will use these 1 or 2 cameos. And then so it used to be everyone will use these 2 characters, the next patch these 2 characters. Then it was everyone will use Cyrax, then everyone will use Baraka, then everyone will use Kano, but now we have Chameleon, and then they just kept the game was falling into the same problems that all their other games were, and all they were looking to do, more so than anything, was nerf. Dave, you and I had many conversations where it was nerf after nerf, and we were like, when are they going to start buffing? When are they going to start giving? And then when they did give, it would be very slight. And you would have to watch 1 or 2 players get their characters changed, not just buffed, but changed in a certain way. A new move, maybe a new cancel, a new animation that now does this, new property on something that does that, and some frame changes. And we watched them have fun, and it's like, man, most people were like, I wish I could, experiment with my character, and yada, yada, yada. So I was very frustrated because I had a whole year to really dedicate, and the game was just never in that place. And then, obviously, end of September, I'm like, all right, Chaos reigns, and then shortly after that, the rumors that the game is done. So I'm like, I just have to accept that this is the game that it's going to be, and they're never going to change it, and they're never going to. And then, of course, as I quit, several characters started to have. Uh, you started to see some serious changes in the game and in the meta. Not just with the way cameos were being done, but the way characters were being done. Even like the character that I would play, Sub Zero, changes to his slide. Huge deal. How they kind of changed the EX clone. And the clone in general, how it breaks the double freeze barrier, and opened up more possibilities that way. So a lot of and then the new move now, I see what they're doing with Kenshi, and they don't just put him in the floor like they did Peacemaker. They tone something down, but not remove it, and then give him something else. Reiko, they originally nerfed his stars, but they nerfed it because obviously they had the idea of another move. So for me, it's I a whole year, a little over a year, I dedicated and waited and waited and waited. So part of the reason why I'm so hard on the game is because while a lot of people who paid their money were waiting, and maybe we didn't have a year and a half to 2 years to dedicate to the game, I felt like NRS was just saying, "Hey, we'll get around to your game as to fixing the game and completing it." But right now we're working on another expansion to sell you. And after we sell you that expansion, then and only then will we come back and do this. And I understand, Dave, you'll say that's a corporate decision. The bosses will say, who is, you're working on this now. I just feel like that's why I'm not coming back. I don't have the time to dedicate to it now, because how could I possibly know when they're going to put it in this state? They don't talk to anyone. They don't communicate with anyone. For all we know, it might have never gotten here. So there's at a certain point in your adult life, it's very hard to carve out some time to stream and play and level up and learn things, etc. And when the game is the way it was for so long, you just change your life around and say, okay, you know what? I made sure I had at least a good year of time that I was going to do X, Y, Z. Nothing happened at that time. My life now is not at a place where I can really dedicate a minute to it. So it just, yeah, it's unfortunate. And I probably would have loved to have played this version of the game. I haven't played it in 6 months. I'm not going to come back to it now and try to say, oh, look at all the changes. Look what I can do. I mean, now I'm like, 6 months. I'm not coming back now. That's probably why. I mean, it's just, and like I said, if you could empathize with that feeling of frustration at all, Dave, that's part of the reason why I was so frustrated with the game.
No, I understand. Let me bring in Franco because I'm going to ask her the same question here as well in a moment. Because obviously, I still think the leaks are probably accurate as far as uh, not necessarily the patches, but the content of the game, right? It's kind of weird that they're adding Madame Bo out of nowhere. I suspect that maybe she was going to be a DLC in the third, combat pack, maybe. But since they're probably not doing it again, it's pure speculation. Um, Maybe they just was like, let's just include her as part of Chaos Reigns. People are, kind of already mad at the package and at the price and at the story expansion, so we might as well just do it. Try to, maybe, um, appease people, try to satisfy them. If this is indeed, if T1000 and Madden War are indeed the last content of the game, again, which there's a likelihood, obviously. King Jr., what's going to be the legacy of this game?
I think the legacy is probably going to be something like it's going to be like similar to Street Fighter V's legacy, like having that really awful launch and being polished at the end. If I'm not mistaken, that's what did you say? That's what happened to Street Fighter Five. I wasn't. That's what I heard about the game, but I didn't actively play it. That's kind of what I would think of if MK1's legacy, uh, with like if T1000 and Madame Bo were the last pieces of content for the game, and there's still other unfinished things about the game that exist, like lobbies and some quality of life changes to the other game modes, like online and stuff.
Before I get into Tom, did you like personally enjoy the game or did you have fun? I know that you and I we went to CEO. You got top 8. I know you like playing Geras. He's definitely one of the like the deep one of the more deeper and more like involved characters. Is he pretty much the reason you're playing the game, or would you kind of quit? Would you have quit like Tom? If the character were, were more dull or whatever.
He's definitely a big reason why I can keep playing the game. He's by far the most fun character in my opinion. Like, kind of similar to Tom's frustrations. Like, I'll be playing Quan Chi and he gets no buffs, patch after patch, no buffs. Gets like the orange portal, still in my opinion bottom one, next to like Rain pre-patch before his buffs. Uh, then Quan proceeds to get no buffs even more, even after a few patches go by, like from getting his orange portal. So uh, he's like my second favorite character if like after Garrus, and I can resonate with that frustration a bit. It took a while for Garrus to get some buffs too. Like he was pretty meh in the beginning, but I think with some tech and some other buffs, like he's definitely gotten some help. But yeah, there's definitely not any other character that compares to the fun factor that Garrus has, in my opinion. But that's just me.
We'll get back and talk about the characters and the gameplay styles in a moment because I think there's still, even though I've been very positive about this game, I still think there's plenty of stuff to criticize. Unfortunately, again, this is where Tom and I will disagree. I think Mike doesn't know what he's saying because hasn't played the game at all almost. Tom has quit 6 months ago, so we have really almost no advocates for defensive and zoning, based gameplay. But I'll get into that later. I do want to ask Tom, just general question. What do you think is going to be the legacy of this game if this combat pack is the last one?
Well, we'll debate this in a second with Mike because I don't think he needs to currently play it to really have an opinion on things, and I don't necessarily
Okay.
think his opinion is wrong. But the legacy of this game, what I think the legacy of the game will be is um, NRS just I think the legacy of the game will be a game that failed to reach its potential in time. In that, I don't think when they made this game they had a good grasp of what they wanted it to be. Um, MKX, the variation system, wasn't something that I don't think required the level of trial and error that maybe even the custom variation, which we know they never really completed in MK11, but certainly not an assist-based fighter. And I think that there was a lot of confusion there with how they wanted it to work, um, and how it was going to be integrated in with the characters. And I think this is the first time that their formula has caught up to them, where like we talk about, like James Chen made a great post when on Twitter. I don't know if you've read it, Dave, when he was responding to Scar, when I responded to Scar, but it's a shame how MK doesn't keep legacy. And he said, basically, while the moves may be the same moves as far as like your normals and whatever, Street Fighter is not really that legacy either. And he brought up key differences from one Street Fighter to the next. And Dave, you bring up all the time, well, the Heat is certainly not a legacy. You know what I mean? Tekken doesn't play like a legacy game right now. I mean, so, um, but I think what I mean by, or maybe what I mean by the lack of stuff caught up to them is, it's like what Tekken doesn't do is, and I know they're on fire right now, or Street Fighter. Street Fighter doesn't say, uh, I know Ryu has all these normals. I want you to redo every normal. I want you to redo every animation. I want you to redo. None of his normals can be the same. None of his moves can be the same. He may not even have like Sub-Zero has a clone. He may not even have Dragon Punch in this game. Instead, he's got something else. You know, this is what what they do with Mortal Kombat. They like Tekken. Can you imagine if Harada said, "Okay, we're going to put in heat, but before we work on the heat system, all the characters that have 100 plus moves, I want you to scrap all 100 plus moves and remake 100 plus moves for every character again, with all different properties, with all blah 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 blah." I think by the time you redo an entire game, just the bare basics of rebuilding every character, then you have very little time to decide on, to work on the game modes, to work on the new system mechanics you've implemented. I think Mortal Kombat, that's what kind of happened. I really feel like they spend so much time rebuilding all the characters from the ground up, and then of course you have your cameo characters, and then I feel like there was very little time left of development before the game had to be launched for them to say, okay, now that we got a couple of months, how do we work this cameo system? And I just don't think there was enough time, uh, which is why the game came out very incomplete and lack of modes, because they just didn't have the time to develop to put into that.
May
So
I
I think
throw in
this
a
game.
comment when you're done? I'm sorry, like it's a
No,
short
yeah,
comment.
I'm done here. I think this game will be remembered as a game that had a great finish, but its potential was not reached until it was too far down the line.
Yeah, King Junior, go ahead.
So to go along with that lack of legacy, which I agree with, I think reinventing the wheel has been Mortal Kombat one of Mortal Kombat's biggest downfalls in the gameplay department. And like I was just talking about, like my huge love for Garrus and the fun factor he has, like his design, in my opinion, is so unique. Like if they were to put him in the next Mortal Kombat game, like how do you top his design? Like, are you really gonna overhaul that design and like scrap away the sand clone or reinvent it, or his sandstorm and
Mhm.
his like animations and strings? Like he has so much that's fun about him. Like I'm afraid they're gonna like if he's in another Mortal Kombat game, I'm afraid he's gonna be like not as fun as his MK1 self. I just wanted to throw that in there to contribute to that
Yeah,
conversation.
and let me ask you this, Dave: if you are someone, let's just say Tekken, and you came in at Tekken, let's say Tekken 4, and I say, Kazuya one, and now you're Tekken 8, and I'm trying to explain to you moves, and I say, okay, yeah, you can Kazuya punish with 1-1-2 there. You know what the move is, right?
No, yeah, absolutely.
But in Mortal Kombat, you don't. Tekken, if I say, yeah, his down back fangs down back 4, right, or his sidestep 4, or down forward 3, or down forward 1, you know what these moves are. I mean, like you physically know what they look like. You know what I mean? And Namco and Capcom, if I talk about Ryu's crouching forward, everyone knows what that is. Everyone knows. Mortal Kombat doesn't have that. And that's kind of the issue they have. They redo those moves. So when I say legacy, I don't mean remake MK9, remake MKX. I'm saying, why are you remaking these moves? You can always add moves, you can always change the properties of the moves you have, but and you could also implement new system mechanics or change some of the old system mechanics to work a different manner. But you eliminate a ton of development time when you don't have to remake and rethink up all of those moves. And that's what they do. And also, Dave, as you've made the point before, the Mortal Kombat community is the most broke fighting game community ever. Why? Because they are the youngest community ever. And most of Gen Z, especially the young part of Gen Z, if you know anything about how the economy is, they're the poorest generation of almost all time. Certainly the poorest generation since the boomer generation. So you're looking at the last generation of the boomers, with the end of the 60s. That's over 50, 60 years. And this is the poorest generation since before that. So when you eliminate some of the older people who are a little more well off, who have a little bit of more money and they can travel, etc., but they're like, man, I don't recognize this game. I got into MK3 MKs ago, and man, this game is so far from that, I don't even recognize it anymore. The Mortal Kombat community, Ed Boon's, in with the old, out with the old, in with the new. That doesn't just apply to his game and his mechanics; it applies to his players. So after several years, it's after one or two games, it almost has 100% turnover, and then the vast majority of the players are brand new and younger, and most of the older ones, they're all right, whatever, it's not MK. And that's kind of the problem. They can keep an element of their game and their characters while changing other things. I think this game is the first time that truly caught up to them, where they implemented something that they really was so different for them, and they had no idea what they were going to do with it. And it just took too much time to get the cameos and the characters off the ground. And then, okay, now what do they do? How do they play? This is why you say, what does Baraka do? Ah, he'll just do a string and a Cyrex. In fact, we'll just have 90% of the cast do that, and we'll call that, there's the first 3 months of our game. That's why their games come out that way. That's why they come out so simple. That's why they take so long to complete. And that's why in this game, the game was very bare bones, as well as still, it took them a year to do the combat shrine, to do the combat, whatever it was, warrior shrine. And then still, we don't have lobbies, which MK has always had lobbies. We don't have that. We don't have uh, individual character rankings, which is something that every single game except for Mortal Kombat has. If you want to rank up every character to, what is it, Elder God, you whatever, how many characters are in the game now? Let's just ballpark it, 30, whatever it is. You have to make 30 PSNs. Like, it's just very so many things that are just online practice mode. It took them a year to give us online practice, despite the mode was right there in your face, and then you can't even queue in online practice when you're searching for ranked games, which, by the way, for the longest time, if you happen to live in the South African region and you couldn't find a game, you probably could have used that for the first year. And thank God that those people are starting to get servers now. I mean, it's just so many things that it's not because they were lazy. It's not because they were too stupid to know their game should have it. They just didn't have the time with their usual rebuilding of everything. And then how is this cameo system going to work? And so many things took a back seat. This is the first time that has ever really impacted the game. And again, Dave, to your point, always keeping it more fresh, younger players out with the older ones. It also hurts the tournament scene.
Let me ask you this. I don't necessarily disagree with what you guys are saying, but some of our friends like Crimson and to mention Vaga, not that he's necessarily our friend, but they would mention, well, the tried legacy. I know Franco will deny this, right? Because I mentioned Franco because he plays Injustice 1 to this day. When they tried legacy from Injustice 1 to Injustice 2, Injustice 2 was probably we talk about, games, NRS games dying quickly, competitively. I mean, we could all agree that game freaking died very, very fast. It didn't have anywhere near the online scene that Mortal Kombat 1 does now, much less MKX, at its, during its prime. So, do you guys? I'm going to start with Franco, Tom, if you don't mind, because I think he's kind of still plays Injustice 1. So I know Franco. I know you don't consider it a legacy. We can get into that if you want to, but I think that's kind of a pointless argument. But I think the last time they tried legacy, it just didn't work, and I honestly don't think. I mean, it has something to do with the games. We all agree MK1 was a disaster on release, but I think this is a community thing. MK has really never been, ever, really let me say this, it has never been on the same terms as like Street Fighter or Tekken or even most recently Guilty Gear. We don't have the numbers, man. It almost doesn't matter how good games are. I don't think Injustice 2 is a bad game at all, but obviously the community didn't like it. Um, then you had Mortal Kombat 11, and I personally despise the game. I know you guys didn't like it that much either, but you know, initially the game had great. It sold very, very well. Then at Evo, I think last time used to say like our games don't really obtain, right? They don't really retain, at least not in the long term, the numbers that the other games do. And I don't think, honestly, I don't think there's anything to do with the game. Like I think Injustice 1 was a great game. Injustice 2 is a decent game. But how do you address that? Because they tried Legacy and it didn't work at all. In fact, it was the biggest failure ever. Franco?
I wouldn't say it was like the biggest failure ever, but all Injustice 2 needed to do, in my opinion, like I think an easy fix to the problem it currently faces is like the long timer and most of it being like slow paced and walking back projectiles is if you had Injustice 1 dash speeds with the Injustice 2 walk speed, that's like my dream for Injustice 3 if that ever exists in the future, but uh, I think they've messed up with the legacy too because they mostly nerfed things. Like Superman's 223, for example, only launched in the corner instead of mid screen meterlessly. Batman's 113 got the same treatment. Um, Many meterless launchers in general were just removed. Gaps were added in strings that may not have needed them. Plus frames were reduced, or if not made minus. So I think a lot of the legacy was a failure because of most of it just consisted nerfs. Uh,
I usually agree with you, but the problem with that is, again, to go back to Tom's argument about this generation, it's not just in Mortal Kombat. You can also see it in definitely in Tekken, to a lesser extent in Street Fighter. I don't really follow Guilty Gear that much, so I can't really comment. But these people cry about everything. Like nothing is allowed. For God's sake, we couldn't even have command grab characters, until like, because I don't know, Kotal Khan apparently, like, what are we doing? So I think, and like, I'm not saying, I'm just playing devil advocate. I don't, obviously I don't agree with these players, right? I think this is absolutely ridiculous. But there is a generational gap here, right? There is a generational shift, right? What With all due respect to Ninja Killer, what he thinks is good zoning is vastly different from what Tom and I is good, what Tom and I perceive as good zoning, right? Because I played Freddy, he played against he played against my Freddy, he played against my Zod, he played against Sinestro, right? Back in the old days. Ninja Killer's first fighting game was MKX. So obviously, it's gonna be a night and day, right, between what he
So is
thinks is good
Tekken, they
zoning.
say, but I mean, again, Tekken doesn't have. It's not like a 2D game where
No,
they have.
I know, but I'm talking about just in general the attitude towards stuff that you like and you think is broken, like you just say. They thought broken, like, what's broken? Martian Manhunter, or Liu Kang when he had those semi-block, and that's broken. You know what's not broken? Havoc. You know, but again, it might be. I think it's just a generational shift, and I think it's kind of hard to please everybody, especially in a modern meta where everybody has an opinion. They can go on Twitter and tweet something and be angry at the developers. Maybe I'm just ranting too much, but Franco, take that into consideration, what I've just said, and I want your opinion, and we'll go back to Tom.
what, you want me to comment on like the generational gap, or what do you
Yeah, I
mean?
mean, don't you think that they kind of have to, address both sides of the island? And I think it's the first time fighting game developers have to do this, right? Because if you made up fighting games in the late '90s, you didn't have to worry about what do people like Tom and Dave think, because everybody was more on equal terms, right? It was a young community, but now you have to appease different players, and obviously MK's almost exclusively appealing to the younger audience. How do what do you think about that?
I
So we
mean,
say
oh,
legacy,
go
but
ahead.
yeah, legacy obviously comes with it's a multifaceted issue.
I mean, I know I'm only 23, and I would probably be considered part of the younger audience, but like, I feel like I'm one of the few younger audience or players that like I really feel like I don't complain too much about like if something's too strong. Like it takes me like kind of like you said when I think of strong zoning, I think of like Sinestro, Zod, Freddy, uh, Summoner Quan, like stuff like that. But somebody that might think Peacemaker has strong zoning, that's like a joke to me. So I feel like I'd be a little more hesitant to just appease or appeal to the younger generation because I feel like what they think is strong isn't actually as strong as it actually is. But that's just my opinion. I know it's not objective, it's subjective. So I feel
Yeah.
like I feel like complaints usually gets things nerfed, even if it's not warranted, in my opinion. Which, like, I think I'm trying to think of an example. Like, I don't want to say Garrus got over nerfed in MK11 because obviously he had the infinite warden bugs, which was super broken. But like his forward 2-1 string, I think was super over nerfed. For example, I don't know if really anybody complained about his mid string being one of the best or the best in the game. It was like mainly his crushing blows and the high damage bugs he had. But yeah, I think a lot of like a lot of modern fighting game players or younger generation fighting game players, like they kind of take some of the fun away with their complaints. Even like there might be some valid complaints, but I think a lot of it's just complaining just because they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, it's annoying. My take on Injustice is that they picked the wrong game to make Legacy. People don't come to the NRS community for Injustice. Injustice isn't what gets you to the NRS community. It's Mortal Kombat. If you say NRS, the average it's like if you say Disney, the average person doesn't say and then name like a Disney character that's not like a main one. Like people say Disney, people say Mickey Mouse. They don't say oh Scrooge McDuck. Even though I do like Scrooge, he's one of my favorites. Um, but you see my point? Like it's Mortal Kombat. It's Mortal Kombat. You say Capcom, what do people say? Street Fighter, right? Street Fighter. So the problem is they picked the wrong game. And then when they made Injustice Legacy, they literally made Injustice 1 with new characters and called it Injustice 2. And then watered it down a little bit. That's basically what they did. For an MK community who says you want to make the same game twice, well, they basically did that, and it didn't go over well. No one wants that. But they also don't want it with Injustice. And I think that is where their mistake was. So when I say legacy, again, I don't mean legacy as far as the same game or even the same system. You could keep like the moves from MK9 or MKX or combine the two and just take one game's normals and just add a few more normals that you saw in X to the character. And then you could have introduced, let's say this game, up block, flawless block to get rid of chip, fatal blows. I mean, all these things are a massive change to have the game work. Take some of the mids and slow them down so you still can have down one, down one, down one, down one. I know the community lives for that move. You could have done all of that. A frame data change, some changes in the system, things like that. And you could have done all those things and even put the cameos in. And you would have so much more time to flesh these systems out because you didn't have to rebuild the characters. You see my point? And you would also have a much better idea of how a character plays because they're going to play somewhere along their legacy line, which also helps you in balancing with how powerful the cameos should be because you already have a better idea. I'm saying they should carry over something they have experience with. You see what I'm saying, Dave? So they know how to tweak it one way or another.
A lot of people would claim that at least this, if you look at like the way Scorpion plays with Ferrotor, essentially like MK9, except he's actually good. Sub-Zero is essentially a character who carries you to the corner once you lock you up, right? It's not as effective as it used to be, but they gave him other special moves, so it's supposed to
day
balance.
One, he didn't do anything. He didn't do any of that. Day one.
No, I know he didn't. But I'm saying like right now, that's what like the opposite side would argue, right? The people who want to, would challenge you. Sector is a zoning character. I don't think zoning is good in this game.
People that challenge me, you're saying this now, almost 2 years into the game, and do you know
people like Crimson, he made a post on Testrum, right? But like, a lot of these games, it takes them a while to get the metas right. He mentions Tekken, people are complaining. He mentions Guilty Gear. People
there's a big difference here.
Fake Guilty Gear. It's not how it used to be. It's not like the previous game. I mean, there is some truth to that. I'm sure you would agree, though.
Yeah, but the problem is, so here's the problem. This is just my opinion. You'll never win this argument with anybody. In my opinion, a lot of their balance patches didn't feel like balance patches, at least post the Chaos Range. It felt like completion patches. Character incomplete. They need these 10 things. That wasn't a balance patch. They didn't give Sub-Zero all these buffs and a new mood to balance him. They did it because he didn't do anything. These patches were not to balance characters. It was to separate character between character and cameo. So now it's not cameo does 90% of the work for you. Character does very little of the work. It's character does a lot of the work. Cameo choice will now expand because character doesn't have to hang on the cameo as much. And then they add some stuff to cameos, like changing the striker gun isn't they essentially made him almost useless, and then they said, okay, here's his gun now, and now he's useful again. It the patches that, I mean, and again, people can always say, well, that's another game. That's another game. Other games do this too. They do, but these other games don't have their day one being dual full string into Cyrex simplicity. Like, I mean, like these other games don't have that. There is nothing akin to that simplicity in Guilty Gear, even on their first day. To, I, I mean, again, it's a tough argument to have because other games complete their game later on. So it's like, well, how are you telling me that Mortal Kombat does it and other games do it? All I can,
No, no, I'm not necessarily. I don't agree with their talking points. I'm just saying that's what people would say, right? They would say, "Well, look, this is essentially what Crimson does, right? A little bit too much." He's like, "Oh, well, look what everybody in Tekken is complaining about the heat system. It's not complete. Everyone changes, right? So draw that equivalency. I don't think it should be made sometimes
okay,
at
let me
all.
say this: Fang Wei is a complete character. Fang Wei and how he works with the heat system is a different discussion. He's a complete character. They don't have to tweak Fang, they have to tweak heat. Do you see my point? With Mortal Kombat, they don't have to tweak the fatal blow system. Well, I guess they do, but they have to actually tweak the physical character. And Crimson may say, "Oh, they give you new moves," but their characters don't do. And again, this is again we're arguing. It's subjective here. Like for example, you say, "Oh, Sub-Zero this carry to the corner." Day one, he didn't have any of that. Sector zoning you, yada yada yada. It took him a year to even get Sector in the game. You know, so these characters, like you say, "Oh, Sub-Zero does X Y Z." Okay, well, it took them a year and a half to do that. Why? Because they just had to do too much to even get to this point. Some characters didn't even have a cameo that they could use. They were using Chameleon and early in the game Serena. I know Serena was for most characters the cameo that they used if they didn't have any synergy with another character, another cameo. Um, this game just again, it was they're having to rebuild from scratch, and all the characters kind of cause these things. So even though Dave, somebody may say to me, "Well, look, Sub-Zero, I don't see any difference, Tom. He does this, carries you to the corner." Okay, but he didn't do that day one. He does it on day 1.5 years later. So that is kind of my and again, like I said, it's a matter of opinion. That's just kind of how I see it. I see a lot of NRS's patches as in this game there when they nerf Peacemaker to the floor, that's obviously a balance patch. But I see like a lot of their changes
Yeah, you're talking
as
about like the rain stuff, like without
completing, yeah,
Tyra,
as completing the game. Yeah, as
yeah,
completing the
not
game.
like Tyra actually really didn't do anything. It was one of the worst guys in the game, like Franco just mentioned earlier, right? So they essentially, they gave him a new normal, gave him, a couple new normals, and um, just to kind of like make him do certain stuff that he kind of could do with Cyrus before, but not to that extent. So I kind of see what you're saying, and I think,
Day one Quan Chi. Look at day one Quan Chi.
yeah,
What they have done to Quan Chi isn't a balance patching. They've been completing it.
no, no, absolutely. I think it kind of reminds me of. I'm sure you guys remember, MKX Shinnok, who just like, just who clearly came out as an incomplete character, right? Then they gave him,
An
um,
overhead, and then yeah, that was fun.
yeah, they gave him over the buff a lot of the stuff. So no, I agree. But let me transition into this conversation. I've kind of been critical of you recently, not because you and I necessarily, disagree a lot, but I think, and I want to involve Franco as well. I want to get his opinion. I think it's kind of hard to discuss the specifics of the game when you don't play that, when you don't play it. I'm sure you would agree, even when, MK11, you and I despised that game, and still do to this day. We still kind of played it, right? We kind of tried our anti armor, and the initial implementation, at least, was a complete freaking joke. We can kind of tell, right? But if you didn't play the game, it's, oh, into armor, and everybody can combo, there's a guessing combos, breakaway is maybe not that, strong anymore. That's what you would think if you probably didn't play the game. Then you actually try playing the game, and you actually watch the game, and it's like, oh my God, what is this, right? So a lot of my criticism is like, you're no longer fighting a good fight, bro. Like, I think we need people to stand up for. I think this game is incredibly offensive, and I think we saw that with, two Sindel players, Connie in Europe, and then Sonic Fox in Mexico winning with essentially unblockables. I don't
Hey,
know what
what
else to
happened to your
call
mic? It's got a little. It sounds like almost like you're in like an echo chamber.
Oh,
You know,
sorry, sorry.
you ain't.
But yeah, take it away. You know what I'm trying to say. I think you're no longer like representing the good fight, and you're just kind of talking about like year one stuff. Which again, I don't think anybody to this nobody's even disagreeing with that, right? Like I don't know anybody who's saying, "Oh my God, you know, when the game was first released, that's when those were the good times." I don't know anybody who's saying that. So you're like, speaking of echo chamber, you're kind of preaching to the choir. Like nobody's
No,
arguing any of this stuff.
I
But you're
think
no longer like, go ahead.
people that say to me, I don't give the game any credit. I keep in mind, people on Test Your Might
I'm not
are
talking
only,
about credit though. I'm
I know,
talking
I know,
about.
but let's just say people are only going to hear my criticism and not just say the how much I gave the game a literal blowjob for how good it's playing right now and the improvements they're doing, which I did. Um, the 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 criticism about offense versus defense. The problem is our community doesn't understand what real defense is. So, it's not really until Tekken 8 that I have actually seen defensive players. I've seen them cry about. I hate cry. I've seen them complain about the balance of offense switching in the past, but not to the extent like they're in Tekken 8 right now. Um, I know people. You brought this up as well. You brought up Sajam, how he said, "Well, the problem is these old school games," and he specifically brought up these old school games from the '90s and early 2000s. The best option was to do nothing. Defense was too strong. What Sajam didn't mention, because he wasn't there, is the reason why the best option was to do nothing, because the offense was even more broken, and you literally couldn't get hit once in half of those games, or the match was over, which is why we did nothing. So as overpowered as people think defense was, it only seemed that way because the offense was twice as overpowered. So defense is just always frustrating for people. No matter how much developers water defense, and this is the problem. We're kind of like in the uh, it's like as defense gets watered down, no matter how watered down they make it, that generation will always complain about it. So no matter how powerful they make offense and how much weaker they make defense, the offensive players will always complain about that version of defense. So they water it down again and they water it down again. But no matter how much they water it down, players will still complain about it because defense is frustrating. And people don't understand why defense seems, like why it's frustrating. It's not because it's overpowered or broken. It's because defensive players, a lot of people, they think they're defensive players and they're not. They can't defend their way out of a paper bag, but they think they are. A true defensive master, that type of a player, is 1 in 100. So if you take that and just do a thought experiment, they have such an experience fact. You take 100 players, one of them is a defensive player, the other 99 are offensive. Most people, when they play a game, they don't say, "Oh, I wonder if my fireball is good and I can run away and throw it." Right? That's not how most people learn fighting games. That's why people that zone or do other things are in the minority. But what happens is you take those 100 players, 99 being offensive, and they all play each other one set. But when the offensive guys play the offensive guys, it's no surprise to them. They play like every other offensive person. And then they play the one defensive player, and they're like, "Well, this is weird. This is stupid. This defense is dumb." And they don't have that much experience because the other 99 players they played were all offensive. To the defensive guy, though, everybody he plays is offensive. So he has the experience factor of 99 to 1. And that's why true defensive players make defense seem overpowered. Defense is much harder to play. But because a true defensive master will always have a heavy experience factor against offensive players, it seems like defense is more overpowered. So what do players do? They cry and they complain. And as defense kind of gets toned down, and there are many forms of defense, trapping, lame out characters, zoning, so on and so forth. As these characters get watered down, it messes up the archetype factor because you get rid of runaway characters and zoning characters and trapping characters, and grapplers get in for free. So then you've got to when you get rid of all those defensive archetypes, then the grappler archetype. I mean, look, Jackie players cried relentlessly against Kodokan. "Oh my God, the half-screen mid." Okay, but if there was a powerful zoner in that game, or a great trapping character, or a lame out character in that game, it wouldn't have been as overpowered. It's just the characters could get in quickly and easily, and then he's a grappler, and grapplers, when they're next to you, are usually going to kill you. When you start removing all the archetypes, then the only archetype that's really left is offense. And people will say that's not this game. I find that hard to believe, considering Final Combat, the first year, was won in a Johnny Cage mirror. Final Combat, I mean, Evo was a Johnny Cage mirror in grand finals. And now we're watching Sindel win with hard to blockables and, knocking you down once. And they'll say, oh, but she's a zoner, though. And that's even worse. That means she zones you out, then you come to her, she hits you once, and then she hard to blockables you. That's even more dumb. I mean, like, people just don't seem to understand. And it's like, because the MK community is so young, it's like the people that have fighting game knowledge are not around enough to correct the problem. And the only ones left are the shills who rely on this game being their paycheck. So they're not going to say anything because they're too busy trying to commentate or whatever. So it's very difficult. Fighting game knowledge that says this is wrong. So when you have these discussions with younger players, they just say, what are you talking about? The zoning is stronger than ever. What are you talking about? The defense is just fine. Skill gap? And it's so hard to, I mean, it's so hard to even have a conversation. So yeah, I mean, the defense is certainly not what it should be. The zoning isn't what it should be. Reiko is the closest thing to a grappler, and he's not even a true grappler. He's a pseudo grappler. So it's a lot of these things. And the problem is, some players have skill sets like this. So this is another issue. Some people, they're not. I hear all the time, well, why don't you beat Sonic like this? I mean, just beat him. He can do it and win. Why can't you do it to him? He can do it to you. Because some people suck at doing that. And if you say do to Sonic what he does to you, well, there's a reason why he's Sonic. Nobody can beat him like that. Nobody can do Ninja Killer better than Ninja Killer. To ask somebody to do that is stupid. Any more than to ask Ninja Killer to outzone somebody else in a pure power zoning battle. That's normally not that he can't, but that's not his strength. Or Sonic, right? Not saying that's that's not his strength. I'm not saying that they can't zone, but in general, everyone has individual strengths, and the Mortal Kombat community just kind of stuck in like, well, do what they do, just do it better. But you're eliminating skill sets from the game. Some people are just very good at that, and when you make those factors of the game the weak part of the game, you make those skill sets extremely weak. And to me, it's not as entertaining to watch the game. I don't per se enjoy watching Sindel go do Tremor or hard to blockable low hat over and over again when she hits you once. That's not enjoyable to me at all. Matter of fact, when I see that kind of stuff, I'm just like, that is. I mean, how can anyone make a justification for defense? And the only time there was any type of defensive aspect in the game was Peacemaker, but he was so like mindless, just one projectile repeat and then the assist, all that garbage in there, that they just nerfed it into the floor. So meanwhile, Sindel is still doing the same hard to blockables like it's the first day of the game and winning.
Yeah, let me again. King Jr. is slightly younger than us. Well, not slightly, a lot. But let me ask you, like, I know Tom obviously doesn't play the game anymore, but he and I both agree. I think this is
I still know what's good and why it's good.
No. I know, and I'm not trying to discredit you, but I'm saying, I'm bringing Franco to give a different perspective. Like, this is not about you. It's more like, am I exaggerating? Like, obviously, sometimes I get caught up. I get frustrated. I call the zoning bad in this game. I don't think it's bad. I don't think zoning needs that many buffs, right? Like a character like Sector, I wouldn't buff her like that much at all. I think she's almost in a good place. I'm just Peacemaker. I will give him like a couple of buffs, right? I don't think it's that far off. I'm like Tom. I'm just trying to see a little bit more variety in terms of like offense versus defense. Rush down versus Sterling, rush down versus zoning, whatever you want to call it. Am I exaggerating? I know that I'm aware that Foxy just got top 8, in a tournament in Europe with Sector. He was using Sector Sonya, and I genuinely enjoyed watching him. I think he was doing a good job, and from running away. Am I a little bit exaggerating? Am I complaining too much? You let me know.
I mean, this mode is still still possible. It's just few and far between the characters that do it. Like there'll be 10 offensive characters, and people will say, "What about Foxy? Did it with Sector?" Okay, but you can name 10 characters that are offensive, and they'll say, "What about Foxy? The zone like that?" And I'm like, "Bro, it's not every character rushes down the same. Not every character zones the same. Just because you're offensive with one character doesn't mean you can pick up Johnny Cage and win with him." Well, sector zoning may not be the zone. Just like offense has different styles, zoning has different styles. And zoning in general, especially if it's only one character that does it one way, doesn't specifically speak to maybe another person who zones. You know?
Franco, what do you think?
Yeah, I think like I don't think you're really exaggerating as far as zoning being on the weaker side, and like I understand where you're coming from with that because like I said, I secondary Quan and I would like to see him have more zoning buffs. And he's like his zoning is different from like Sindel's insta air zoning. She's usually zoning on the air with her instant airs. Quan Chi's zoning on the ground. Sector zoning mostly in the air with her insta airs. Um, but another thing too that I think like what Tom was saying earlier is like it's so easy to execute at least pre-patch peacemaker zoning. You couldn't just pick up a character in like MK9 for example, like Cabal, and just start winning with them. Like a lot of people claim like, oh, that game had broken aspects to it, and you know whatever like the things that were broken had like a skill gap and execution barrier, and I feel like the execution barrier is like not there as much, and I think that's also a big like thing that kind of is missing from these newer games. Like Deadshot's like a good example of what not to give a zoner. Like you don't give a zoner a full screen jab and wrist cannon, at least pre-patch wrist cannon. Uh, I know that's one of NRS's like biggest fears is to have another Deadshot, but that's you just don't give a character a full screen projectile that starts at like 10 frames and travels across the screen really fast. So yeah, I don't think to answer your question, I don't think you're exaggerating as far as archetypes being weaker, like non-offensive ones or non-rushdown ones. And I do think in general, like the execution barrier is kind of missing, and it's a lot easier to just pick up like Homelander and rush down with him than it is to rush down with like Cabal or like Zatanna and Injustice One. Um, I hope that kind of answers like some of the things you guys are
No,
talking
no,
about.
no, it definitely does. But I think there's also this aspect, and this is where Tom and I sometimes disagree. First of all, I do think this game. I don't think this game is that easy to play as people make it out to be. Um, like that's in Sindel stuff to time it in a manner, where you have variety, so they can, block it every single time. Holding whether it's going really quick from down to up or up to down, depending on your times or mix up. I don't think that's easy to. You really don't see her that much, um, even at the highest level.
I mean, it's not
Most people,
hard
like
to
you
do
said,
either. It's not
what's
hard to
that?
do. It's not hard to do.
No, it's not. But I'm saying it's not the so much. It's not like the Deathshot stuff and the Deathstroke stuff that was initially in the game. In
I
Injustice.
mean, they
All I'm
said they said Kenshi was was close to as hard as MK9 Cabal to play, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean,
well, the point that I was gonna make is that these kids now, they don't have to be kids, even adults, right? If they want to learn something, there's so much more information out there right now.
true.
If you wanted to learn, I'm not saying people are better now than people were back in the day. All I'm saying is that, if you want to learn a character, there are probably like 10 guides and they're all super legitimate, super accurate. Back in the day, if you wanted to, I don't know, learn Freddy or learn how to play Sub-Zero, there was not that much out there. Like you kind of had to watch, you had to travel, you had to go locally, right? You had to watch tournaments, etc., etc. Whereas now, I mean,
But this is not an
take
MK
your
issue.
pick.
This is not a. So here's the problem. When I talk about defense, whatever, it's not a Mortal Kombat issue. And I think there are many people who will call me out and say, "Oh, every game." I understand this. In general, every game is giving you better offense while watering down the defense. And people, when you talk about defense, they will almost always just point to just one character, maybe two out of a whole roster, and say, "See." Meanwhile, the other characters are doing other shit. So it's just an every game issue. That's just the way developers are going. Unfortunately, they're just trying to make. In their mind, people want nonstop action, and the only way to do that is to improve the offense to the point where now characters kind of open them. I mean, people are like, "Where's my low overhead and throw? How do I open somebody up?" That's literally what players look for. And I think offense has become stronger. I think mechanics, the way character tools are designed to open you up as opposed to you opening the player up. And at the same time, they've toned down characters that can be defensive and characters' defensive tools are like the zoning. Like you're never going to get the old school zoning and lame out characters. But the new versions of zoning and lame outs are barely qualified to be called zoning or lame. But the offense is still overhead low throw combo, blah, blah, blah. And it's nowhere near that powerful on the defensive side.
But yeah, I know Franco mentioned about, how NRS is scared of Deathshot or Deathstroke or whatever. But then they add Ghostface, who's essentially playing like backer, obviously, but without the teleport, right? He has to somewhat work his way in. So it's funny how they're not scared of that, even though like four of them at one online tournament I was watching. So that's okay. And by the way, the person who won that tournament was, I believe, Yadriel, who was using Kenshi. It's hilarious. So it was literally like an all rush down fest, just nonstop 50, 50, 50, 50. They don't mind that, but God forbid that, that there's one character, and even if there is like a peacemaker, he gets brutalized. Um, to the extent that I don't think he's as bad as people claim, but like obviously he was over nerfed and maybe could use a couple of buffs, in the long term. But yeah, it's just to me is the biggest issue about this game. It's no longer the day one, the year one rather complaints. I think that's kind of like history at this point again because nobody's denying that this game was a failure. I'm sure there are a couple of trolls online and I've seen them, but any person with any credibility did not protect this game on release, and they might have hidden it for, you know, for whatever purpose.
They all commentate still or do YouTube videos, and a lot of them with credibility protected.
I know, but it's not. This is what Cryptid is right to some extent. Obviously, if you're a commentator, let's say for the NBA, you're not going to trash the sport because why would you? Like it's or if you're
They
if
lowered the
you're
rim to 8 feet
you're a
tall. I'm
commentator
sure
for the
they would
Chiefs,
trash it.
whatever, you have a home game, you're not gonna trash the Chiefs because that's your team. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, so that doesn't make any sense. So of course, it's not. I've seen Mr. Akkonen, for example. I don't know if he was referring to, but I've seen him criticize the game. I didn't say Crimson was like, yeah, everybody agrees that even Vulgar said that the release of the game was not good at all. So I think there's almost universal agreement here. I don't know anybody with any credibility.
Well, but the people that you're mentioning also don't know why we can't turn the game around like Street Fighter V does, and they don't realize the MK1 arc is not even close to the same arc as Street Fighter V. But that's a
Well, I would. Well, because let's discuss that then. I want to say that the reason, because you talk about like Street Fighter Five losing a lot of players, which is to some extent true, but a lot of them also stayed and stuck around. And I don't think that's it. And by the way, I think that game was quote unquote saved a lot later than this game was because it took a while for them,
is, but
to
they
fix the
weren't
input
coming
lag.
from an MK11 type of scenario. A lot of people stayed and stuck around for MK11 until the very bitter end.
I
It's
don't. I
only
don't
until
see
only
any.
until
I don't
MK1
think
that they
the
left.
association matters at all. I think that's completely
I
irrelevant.
do 100%. A lot of the people, it really wasn't MK11 that made people leave. It was MK1 following MK11 and the way 11 ended. If if this game followed MKX and there was no MK11, we wouldn't have this drop off. We only have this drop off because people were so frustrated after MK11, and then we got this game. So they said, "I'm leaving." Had this game followed MKX, it'd have been the same as Street Fighter V. Most people wouldn't have left. They would have stuck around. The game gets righted. all is well, on to the next game. But MK11 happened, unfortunately. The biggest abomination on God's green earth. Mortal Kombat 11 was released, and people, much like Street Fighter 5, they stuck. See, people stuck with Street Fighter 5, and they didn't have Street Fighter 5 didn't give you the MK11 ending, because right at the point when MK11 was like, people were like, I'm sick of it. People were at that point in
No,
Street Fighter 5.
Street Fighter
People
5 at the very end time.
hold on. But they did. But hold on. The problem is, at the end of Street Fighter 5, they eventually did it. At
I
the
know, but you
end,
mentioned Street Fighter 4,
at
but you know
the
the
end of
last version of
MK11,
Street
they
Fighter
did.
4 is literally one of the worst. This is almost universally again agreed upon. Our friend playing to win, Matt, he said that version of the last version of the 4 was the worst because of guys. You already know, right? You don't have to watch
The
Elena.
last version of MKX, a lot of us think was the worst, right?
It was, but not. I think Street Fighter 4 was
There's a
even.
lot of similarities
Again,
between
this is what
Street
we call
Fighter
it.
4 and
There's no
MKX.
way to prove this, so this is all like conjecture. It's all hypothesis. There's really no way to prove this. You know what I blame for MK1? You know, having a bad version? MK1! What the hell does MK11 have to do
No,
with everything?
I'm not blaming the. No, I'm saying the community though. The reason. No, so here's the problem. You say the people still stayed with Street Fighter 5. So there's a couple of problems here. One, they would have. One, they if they would have stayed with MK11 just like they stayed with Street Fighter 5. The problem is when Street Fighter 5 eventually gave them something, MK11 eventually gave you nothing, and then they abandoned the game. Uh, so if I look at if Street Fighter 4 ended like MK11, Street Fighter 5, I don't think they would have stayed with it. The reason why they did is because Street Fighter 4 is kind of like the MKX of the new era of Street Fighter. Had some good versions, had some bad versions, and then the final version is kind of up for debate. Some like it, some don't. You know, you and I don't like the final version of MKX. They got rid of the armored launchers, and the problem is that was not that was a bad thing, but it's kind of built into the defense of the game, which kind of causes some problems. Especially with the anti-air. That's kind of what their anti-air answer to anti-airs were: armored launchers as punishers. So I really do believe, had you not had the abysmal ending of MK11 and MK1 followed MKX, I think the majority of people would have stayed. They would have complained. Ultimately, they would have stayed. And then a year and a half later, where we are now, the product drastically improves. It's in a far better state. You hear that, Vulgar? I said it's drastically improved. I have nothing bad to say about how the game is playing right now. I think this is something that I would very much want to play. And I think they would have stayed with it. And this game would have improved. And then it would have had a Street Fighter 5 arc. The problem is MK11, just people were done. They were done. And they said, hey, I'm going to stick around. And then MK1 came out and they said, that's it. That's the nail in the coffin. That's the only reason why. Otherwise, sure, it could have had a very much Street Fighter 5 arc. It just, MK11. It's MK11. The MK11 is the worst fighting game ever created. I mean, even Tao Fang and Way of the Warrior, worse than MK11. Terrible.
Well, let's ask Franco. Franco, what do you stand on this issue? Do you blame the MK11? Is the previous game, is there some kind of impact that it can have on the current game? Where do you stand on this issue?
I think I think it is partially to blame because a lot of people got MK11 vibes when they saw MK1's like first trailers and maybe played it in the stress test. Like everything was slowed down and the strings were clunky and offense was still pretty toned down for the most part. And when the game released, it still was pretty uh, like a underwhelming launch. And power level was low, like I said. So I think MK11 is partially to blame for sure. Like I think it is a factor. Um, Whether MK11's existence like made or break MK1, I don't know because obviously we're not living that timeline. But
MK1 made or broke it. It just MK11 put MK1 in a make or break. Street Fighter 5 put Street Fighter 6 in make or break. Well, MK11 put MK1 in make or break. And guess what? It broke. They improved it now, but it took them a year and a half to do that. I mean, but to the point to get to this point. To this point, it took them a year and a half. I mean, they've made improvements since then, but most of their best improvements came post Chaos Reigns.
Again, the issue there's really no way to prove this, right? Because we, like Franco said, we don't live in that.
Subjective opinion, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we don't really live in that time. I personally, I don't blame MK. Again, I don't have to reiterate how I feel about MK11. Been there, done that. I just think the game, Mortal Kombat 1, is blamed for itself, not anything else. Um, because a lot of people didn't even like Street Fighter 5. Again, a lot of the community didn't like the V triggers, didn't like the way just the game felt. And you would think, well, Street Fighter 6 is going to suffer, right? But it didn't, right? Street Fighter 6 was released as a complete game with complete characters. Um, Arguably, the most balanced game, the most balanced fighting game on release of all time. And you consider the fact that it lasted a year without any balance patches. MK1. I mean, right? I don't even finish my sentence, right? MK1 would have died almost in like 6 months in, right? It would have been nothing but Cyrax with a little bit of sprinkle of Kung Lao, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I don't agree with this argument. Again, I would just say blame MK1 for MK1. That's the way I see it. And but at the end of the day, I don't think it's about year one to me anymore. I think it's about moving forward. Um, I do want to ask Franco about Texas Showdown, and I know he's going, but I do want to ask Tom before. What are your vibes? Do you think that this is it for the game in terms of content and also in terms of patches and support?
I think this is the end of the game as far as content goes, and that's mainly a business decision. Right now, I think, and again, God, this is how childish our community is. I'll say it slow. I think the game is probably going to end up pretty good. So, for all those who say, Tom, you don't whatever, I've said it 10 times, and yet you're all going to forget that I said it. I think that it's a business decision. So I do think the content is done, but I don't think it is any indication to how good or bad the game is right now. I think it's just a straight business decision. Dave, you and I know this. I've unfortunately younger people in our community we don't even they don't know how money works. Even unfortunately, some of the older people don't know how money works in our community. They've never had it. So this is games work off profit margins, not so much did they make a profit. If sure, let's say this game only sells 7 or 8 million, did they make a profit? Absolutely. But how much of a profit? So the way it works is WB Games is a business, owns several gaming studios. Now the profits of all these games go into the keeping the lights on, the total overhead of WB Games. So all those studios owned by WB Games, their day-to-day operations, all that stuff, that happens. So if each game turns a very small profit margin, each game individually made a profit. However, the profit margin is not enough to have the whole of WB Games operating within a profit, acceptable profit margin. So that's how they look at it. Like, if it's not worth it to really do XYZ, if there's only a very little benefit monetarily, then, it's not worth constantly spending money. Let's do something that makes bigger money. So this game, even if it turns a profit, I don't believe it will turn the profit. I believe, obviously we know that they sold almost 5 million before Chaos Reigns. I think it was like 4.3 million it was reported. Chaos Reigns, 5-6 months in, they're like, well, MK sold 5 million. So from Chaos Reigns, they only sold a few 100,000 units. And the majority of their sales came within the first 3 months. So if you look at a sales chart, first 3 months were great. Then a nice steady decline. And then Chaos Reigns, it was straight to the floor. So if you're in Warner Brothers, you look at this and you say, look, and they probably spent hundreds of, to this, Dave, to do like what they did with Chaos Reigns, the full motion video, all that stuff. That is millions, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of work that they put in. And they look at it and they say, we're not, if we project our profit going forward, it's not going to meet where they want. So they say, okay, pull the funding, make another game, where we can maximize on profits. And that's kind of it's a business decision. So I do believe the funding is done because I believe the numbers look at this game is not going to reach whatever profit margin the higher ups want it to reach. So I think best thing they can do, abandon ship, don't throw good money after bad as far as they see it, and release another game because no matter what they do in this game, it's the perception is only going to change slightly, and it's not going to change enough for them to really maximize, at least in their opinion. I think when they look at the numbers, especially post Chaos Reigns, it's not going to maximize on the money that they're going to have to put in to continue development. So I believe that is just a strict business decision. Clearly, the game is leaps and bounds better now. However, numbers are numbers and business is business, and unfortunately, this game is a casualty of that. It's not the first, and it won't be the last.
Yeah, I think that's a. I would agree, but you wouldn't be surprised if they release patches and support, right? Would that shock you? Maybe
Which I
mid-season,
believe they can
especially.
do, but I don't think an expansion
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
or
don't think so
like new
either.
characters and things like that. No.
Yeah. So Franco, talk about Texas Showdown. I know you're going in a couple of weeks here. What does your pool look like? Are you excited, and what are your expectations?
My pool changed like 3 times already, so I don't even think I want to speak on my pool right now because it probably changed since I sent the screenshot for the third time in our group chat earlier. But uh, I'm just hoping to do really well with the tech I've been waiting to use over there with Garrus, and I think there's 153 entrances. Registration's closed, so yeah, 153 entrants I think I saw for the game, and Sonic's there. I saw Gambler, Pulse, Gurr's there. Some other notable pros too. So I think it'll be a really exciting event, and the new patch is going to be taking place. T1000 is going to be banned. I'm assuming. So we'll get to see maybe
Probably,
those
well,
new changes in the patch.
probably Madam Ball will be banned as well, I assume, if T1000 is banned.
Yeah, I think they're both going to be banned.
Well, last time we went for 3 hours. I would like to keep it more reasonable this time. I do want to ask Tom a couple more questions. Um, I know Tom doesn't think he is, and he's being over dramatic, but I think a lot of people were want to know, like, um, what are you gonna do from here on? Are you gonna play the next MK game or the next Injustice game? Lord knows what it might be. What are your kind of plans for the future? Because a lot of people do ask for your content, and they do want to ask, what you plan to do. Can you tell us?
One, nobody asks for my content. Nobody cares. I've
I
I've
stop. Literally, just one fucking guy was like, "That's your mind of all like a dead place." Like, Dom, I come enjoy watching you. When are you gonna be streaming it?
that guy
Stop.
that
Anyway,
guy
just
that
answer the
guy
question.
that guy probably hasn't watched me a day in his life. That's just something that people will say, even though I highly doubt they did. Um, One, I'm not someone foolish enough to think anybody cares if my content or anything I do or say matters. Nobody cares to watch me play, which is fine. That's life, and nobody cares to hear what I have to say. So I'm not a fool who thinks that anything I do or say has anything of consequence, or anybody actually wants to see it. With that being said, I don't really have any plans to do any more YouTube videos or stream ever again. Um, so maybe the next game, who knows? But as of right now, I would say I am not planning to play it. But that could change. Who knows? Depending where my life is.
So you don't plan on streaming this game at all, but in the future you're still leaving you're leaving it open, right? Is that correct?
Maybe down the line, a few years from now, we'll see. Right now, if I had to say so, I would say no. But I'm not a psychic, so can't tell what the future is yet.
No, fair enough. So I think maybe this might be a good play time rather to wrap it up. So stay tuned. Obviously, we're gonna have a podcast. Could be bring Tom back as well to talk about T1000 or Madden Bowl. We'll see what the situation holds. Any last minute words you guys want to share? Let's start with Franco.
Um, Dang, you got me on the spot at a bad time. I can't really think of anything right now, other than just hoping that I do well at Texas Showdown, and I know we'll probably maybe make a podcast before Texas Showdown since the patch is coming Tuesday. But
Right. Yeah.
um, I guess I'm just hoping for Quan Chi buffs that weren't shown in the combat cast, but that's pretty hopeful.
Mhm.
I won't hold my breath on that. So I'm just looking forward to this patch because I think it's the best patch they've released since the game came out, and I'm hoping that there's more than what they've shown in the patch they're releasing.
Tom, your last word. You're the guest.
Yeah, I'm
You
looking
have
forward just to see
spotlight.
what they did with the game in general, uh, in the patch notes, and I think that I would like. I hope. I hate that the community has an outlook for this game that is, well, why travel? You could just stay at home and play. Well, look, that's the business model for anyone to make money off any game. Don't bother traveling. Don't bother competing. You sit at home and stream and make YouTube videos. However, no fighting game scene can survive with that business model, unfortunately. Um, so at the end of the day, I want to see the community getting back to play the game because they love it. Honestly, if it's you're at the point where you have to work the quote unquote business model to make money off fighting games, you should rethink your life choices, quit fighting games, and actually do something that makes some real money. So that you can have the money to do what you love. Because clearly, streaming fighting games ain't giving you that money. Otherwise, you'd still be traveling for it. Uh, I would like to see the community really support this game. I see a lot of people in the community, and I plan on being more supportive of this game, just because I want Mortal Kombat to do well. I see a lot of people in this community always kind of holding people accountable for, oh, this game, or you're hating on the game, you're doing this, or you're not supporting the game. But when I look at the tournament numbers and I look at where it is at Evo, I'm like, everyone is guilty of not supporting the game. Everyone's guilty of not supporting the game, period. Maybe I should go to Evo. Me and Peg, I know Peg's going. Maybe I should go. And look, if I go to Evo just to watch this game, man, none of you guys have an excuse to not go. And support the game. I just really think, I think everybody should get back to this. I think this game is coming to a place where, look, I don't know that every character will. I still think a lot of the soul, which is another conversation another day, of Mortal Kombat is not in the game. I think if you look at the presentation and the ambiance and a lot of the soul of the characters from their former Mortal Kombat selves really isn't captured well in this game. Uh, I mean, my God, we have a Sub Zero and Scorpion, and they're both Sub Zero. They're just the timeline. I mean, like, come on, man, like it's too much. But I really want to see the community getting back at least a little bit. The people that are around to play this game, travel and play this game. Mike Hollow has always said, if you want to shut me up, and 2,000 of you show up to Evo, that will shut me up really quick. So all these people who would love to just shut up these naysayers, you have the power to do that. You just don't do it. And realize, as a Mortal Kombat community, the positive and negative sides have to stop. And I'm saying this as a guy seen on the negative side. I'm done with the negativity. Even though I don't view it as that, I view it as criticism. Because here's why. There is no such thing as a positive and negative side winning or losing. Everyone loses. There is no side that wins. Everyone loses. When we do this, when we can't come together, it's mutually assured destruction. And if people are right, and they actually believe that the whole world has been dunking on Mortal Kombat, well, we're not doing any favors by dunking on each other. So what I really want to see is everything. Like, I don't care what somebody said or somebody did in the past. Let that shit go. Just rebuild the bridges, and we need leadership and we need the community to come together. That's the only way MK wins.
Well, I think that's a great note to end this episode on. And I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank Tom for taking time of his Sunday evening away from his wife and kids to join Franco and me on the podcast. If we don't do the podcast next week, which I'm sure we will, I want you guys to watch Texas Showdown. And I want you guys to give to give the patch, to give T1000, to give Madam Bo, whatever, to give it a chance. And we appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Nexus podcast. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody.